A very good morning to all my students. This is Dr. Pinky Isha, Department of English, Rabindranath Bharati University. Today we are going to talk about, rather I would provide you a lesson on the theatre of Bert Brecht and a very short review of the play, The Good Person of Sezua. Now before we begin with the theatre of Bert Brecht, let me tell you in very short that how do we define theatre. I'm not going to go back to the classical origins of the theatre with regard to the festival of Dionysius and how theatre used to be theorized or was theorized by Aristotle and Plato. What I wish to tell you, and this is according to the Greek notion of the word theatre, is that first and foremost, and this is a literal meaning as well, first and foremost, theatre is the seeing space. The seeing space. Now this space can have another word which is the seeing place. So spaces and places can be anything. It can be indoors, outdoors, it can be a sidewalk, it can be something like a parking lot. Moreover, this concept of the theatre does not only encompass and stop at the seeing place. Theatre also means performance, the idea of performance, the body of literature, the body of documentation that goes with making a play. So theatre is in fact an umbrella term that means much more intense a phenomena. Now when I'm sitting here and talking to you, do you think that this is performance? Yes, of course this is. If not a full performance, maybe performance to an extent. Theatre again has to involve at least one actor, there can be more, and a minimum of one audience. There can be various kinds of dramas. There can be closet dramas which are written entirely for the reason for being put up on the stage. There can be dramas which do have a script but do not have words. For example, Samuel Beckett's Act Without Words. There can be improvisatory dramas in which there isn't any script in the beginning. A few characters, a group of characters come together in a workshop mode, in a discussion mode. They start by playing games. They start by talking with each other on similar or disparate experiences. And from their talking, you see a topic emerges. And this topic could be the impetus for a play. And this is called improvisatory drama, which is very much which was in from the 1990s in Britain and in the US, which was a play wasn't scripted. It was improvised then and there. All right. So just to, come back to Bert Brecht. Bert Brecht is a great influence. In fact, one of the, unmistakable and of course, the greatest influence probably on modernist playwright, postmodern playwrights and filmmakers even till today. So who was Brecht? Brecht was a modernist, but he was also staunchly political and hugely literary. Brecht was also an important playwright because when we see the idea of theatre, Brecht says that theatre is not for entertainment. Theatre is for education. What kind of education is Brecht wanting to propagate? See, when people come to the theatre, they of course want to have themselves entertained. But Brecht says that these seeing spaces, according to the definition of theatre, should also perform the function of education. They must be able to bring out the audience from their complacent shells. They must be able to make the audience think, ponder, and not get carried away by the action and the characters. A very, very famous and perhaps the most defining theoretical, stances of Brecht in his plays is the Verfremdungseffekt, which is also called the We effect. It is also called the alienation effect and the estrangement effect. Now, before I even go on to this alienation effect, without which we cannot talk about Brecht at all, let me give you a brief outline of Brecht. Brecht was born in the late 19th century in 1898 and he died in 1956. At the time when Brecht was born, people were, you see, they had witnessed Antonin Artaud's Uburoy, and there was this idea of theatre, of another kind of theatre where we can consider the unconscious myth, we can consider violence, etc. Brecht saw that the dramatic theatre, the naturalist theatre, the Aristotelian theatre was lacking in something. What was this lacuna? This lacuna was actually the presence of the audience who did not go back with a confirmed idea or with a confirmed belief in their minds after coming out of the theatre. They were so emotionally taken up by the characters, they were so emotionally driven by the action, as Brecht says, that they were unable to decipher the message of the play. So in his epic theatre, a term which he didn't coin, of course, I'll be coming back to it as to who coined it, and further influences on Brecht, he started the epic theatre, and the epic theatre was entirely different from naturalistic theatre, which relied on two basic elements. One was association, as I said. I associate with the characters performing. The other one was emotion. So, a dramatic theatre, an Aristotelian theatre, a naturalist theatre would actually make the audience come to such an association with the characters, such an association with the situations, and bring him to such an heightened emotional state of mind that he would lose his powers of judgment. So in Brecht's epic theatre, we have two very vital things. One of this is engagement. Engagement is very important. What is engagement? Engagement means you are engaged with what is happening. You're not dispassionate. You're not out of the auditorium. And awareness. Awareness means that you are fully aware as to how, what, and when the play is trying, or what the play is trying to express. When is the play making, or why should the play make this kind of a, whatever the story may be. So instead of association and emotion, what Brecht pointed out, the other two things that were required was awareness and engagement. Brecht said that the characters should not become Lear. They should point out at Lear. Which means that if you are to play King Lear, then the person watching the play should not become King Lear. The character who is playing the character of King Lear should not become King Lear. He should hint at the situation and the ordeals that King Lear goes through. So when during the 90s, during the 20s of the 20th century, during the 20s of the 20th century, we see the date is somewhere after 1920, Brecht, after being trained in the medical profession, he took a keen interest in drama, in theatre. And this was the reason why he was apprenticed to Max Reinhardt, a very important director during those times who used to produce iconoclastic films. After the 1920s, he also met another very, very influential, very big theatre theorist and, theoretician of the theatre, who was Max Erwin Friedrich Piscator. Max Erwin Friedrich Piscator, for the very first time, he introduced a kind of drama which was for the audience not only to emotionally involve them, but to point out to issues related to our daily lives. Now, Brecht said that the primary function of drama is to present the essential and intense view of reality. What do we mean by essential and intense? It means not colored by such things as individual preferences, not colored by such things as idiosyncrasies that we usually, or biased attitudes that we usually have. So this is a vision of reality. This is a kind of reality that will give you and that will lead you to the truth. But If you see the world scenario after the 1920s, as the World War had started in 1960 and ended in 1918, Brecht's situation was becoming more and more difficult. He couldn't voice his theories about the theatre. And in 1933, when Brecht was put on the Nazi blacklist, he decided to leave his own country. He decided to leave Germany. What happened is, just immediately before 1933, when his play, The Threepenny Opera, in 1928 was staged, it took the world by a storm. It was very well received in Weimar, Germany. But after that, in 1933, the Nazis and the entire Nazi control of the state, along with the power of Hitler, the fascist regime, the killing of the Jews, all of which were, chronologically very organized, and everything was, not very conducive for playwrights and artists. Brecht decided to be in voluntary exile. And so he left his country. This voluntary exile took him to Sweden, it took him to Denmark, it took him to Finland, and ultimately to the US. For a long 11 years and more, Brecht had been away from his country. This was a voluntary exile during which he had written the best of his plays, including the one that you all have in your syllabus, The Good Person of Cesua. He had written Mother Courage and Her Children. He had written The Life of Galileo and Galilei. So all these are plays which hint at the essential and the most intense vision of reality. Brecht also said that theatre is not a slice of life, quote unquote. It is not a slice of life. It is a story. Now, why do you think he said theatre is not a slice of life? Once again, the referendum's effect would be terribly misleading if you were to think of theatre as a slice of life. It is a story that gets you to the truth, which may be like life. It may be mimetic. It may be mimesis, but in a different way. Not in the way that you are taken up by it, you're destroyed by it, or you have lost your thinking faculties. All right? How does Brecht depart from reality? How does he depart from the so-called naturalistic plays is something which is very important. I'll give you another definition, and this is very interesting. Brecht says, art is not a mirror of life. It is a hammer with which to shape life. So art is not a mirror which reflects light. Art cannot reflect light. It is a hammer. With the hammer you chisel out, you shape, you hammer out life. Okay? Now this definition shows you that the characters will not be like characters in real life. They can hint at characters. They can have gestures. The characters will behave like characters and point to real life characters. Now, how is this done? The characters are there as it is. But these characters will not be characters like we have in a typical naturalistic or the Aristotelian character. Okay? The characters do exist. They approximate not 100% of the characters like human beings, but they are somewhere in between fiction and truth. Okay? Now, another thing which he said is very important. He said that if you could think of the theatre as a boxing match, when people go to a boxing match, they know that the auditorium is meant for boxing. They know that it is a virtual place only for, the punches. That is real, of course, it is, as you can see it. But you will see the audiences watching a boxing match are so taken up by the boxing. They are engaged, of course, and they are aware what is going on, that this is not true. This is because there is a boxing match today. Brecht says theatre is exactly like that. You cannot go on to placing yourself in somebody else's boots, because then you will lose the message of the play. And this is the basis, this is the soul of what you call alienation. And how is this alienation technically brought about in his plays? There are 3 to 4 elements which Brecht adopts in his plays, starting with number 1. Brecht talks about the use of signs, symbols, placards, posters, and of course, half curtain. I repeat, Brecht talks about signs, symbols, number 2, number 3, placards, number 4, posters, number 5, half curtains, number 6, the use of a narrator when the play begins, or the use of a narrator in between the acts and scenes. Why is this done? Now, when a narrator comes in the beginning of the play, we are made aware that the chunk of life which we are watching is actually a story. It is not real life. The half curtain means that when a play is intermediarily, the one scene shifts over to another scene, or one act ends and goes over to another act, the curtain is only half, so people can see, the audience can see that feet are shuffling and moving on the stage and maybe reorganizing the furniture, and some people are moving in and some people are moving out. So that creates a break with the auditorium. You're not lost inside the play. Signs, posters, placards. Have you ever seen that when we are leading our daily lives, your mom or dad comes with a poster or a placard like this and shows it to you? No. So these are all the distancing modes with the use of signs, symbols, posters, placards. These are all the distancing modes which Brecht adopts to drive home the point and bring in a regular jerk of the audience to experience the message of the play rather than be immersed in its emotional content. All right. Now, having said this, let me also tell you a little about theatre as a ritual. I've already talked about theatre as literally meaning the seeing space, how theatre is also performance, how it is also the body of literature and the body of, the documentation that goes with making a play. There are different kinds of theatres, there are different kinds of plays, there has to be an audience, there has to be an actor, there has to be an auditorium. Brecht said another very important thing, that the fourth wall needed to be broken. The fourth wall is a wall that separates the audience and the actors. In the theatre of Brecht, the audience does have the power to come up and stop a play, propose something, maybe come up with a suggestion that this is not okay, this would have been better, that would have been better, stop the play altogether. So the fourth wall effect in Brecht's plays, as in Piscator's plays, is very, very important. Brecht not only took information or not only took his inspiration from plays like the cabaret, the silent films, Shakespeare's history plays, ancient medieval dramas, mythological plays, but he incorporated all these to make his own play, the epic theatre. And this epic theatre is a theatre which believes that the acts, the scenes would be so independent that each act, each scene could suffice or stand on its own, which meant that even if you view the scene separately, without considering the composite whole of the drama, the scene would be episodic, but nevertheless it would stand ground. So this was also a distancing effect, which meant that each scene or each act was not dependent on the other, not so much dependent on the other, not if we could separate it and see and get no meaning out of it, not in that manner. A scene could very well have its own existence by itself. So Brecht's plays were episodic. His plays had characters which were different, entirely different from the naturalistic play characters, entirely different from Aristotelian plays and dramatic plays. All right. Now, when we come to the play in hand, the one that is there in your syllabus, The Good Person of Sezua, we would see that, yes, of course, I had to tell you about ritual, and I will, I think I would conclude my speech with that. But okay, before I start the play, let me tell you a little about, since I was talking and I got diverted, a little about ritual. See, when you talk about theatre, and this is important because Brecht was writing in a variety of genres. Why I'm talking about ritual? Suddenly, why is this new interpolation? Well, I'm discussing the theatre of Brecht. You see, Brecht had written in various genres. He had written history plays, he had written comedies, he had written dramas, he had written, well, folk dramas, he had written musicals. All right? So, exactly where is drama's original inspiration? Now, we have this idea of the ritual. A ritual is something which, is one of the innermost, one of the most primeval penchants of human beings ever since civilization. A ritual can mean anything. A ritual can mean a ritual enacted on some mythical or legendary past. It can be a form of worship where ritual is involved. It can be a form of legendary remembrance or enactment where again ritual is involved. And all this, when cumulatively taken together, can be called performance. So when we say that theatre is also performance, we cannot forget the great role of ritual. When Fraser was talking about all societies emerging in the same manner, he was slightly wrong because the functionalist believed that all societies did not evolve in the same manner. And here there are contradictory theories. I would only like to tell you, I would go on to something else after this, the play, without wasting any time, because this is an introduction to Bert Brecht and his theatre, and then going on to the play. There is this very famous, you see, a very leading functionalist theorist, and his name is Bronislaw Malinowski. Bronislaw Malinowski said that the element of ritual, the element of maybe myth and ritual together, is one of the most primeval instincts of man that exists in the institutions that we are, made to, visit, that controls our lives. It is also present in the community. So the importance of myth and ritual in drama is very, very deep. It goes much deeper. He was actually an anthropologist, an ethnographer working in the field of social sciences, working in the field of social theory, and working in the field of field research, who said that theatre is also something that cannot be divorced from the element of ritual, the element of myth, the element of performance, the element of worship, whether in primitive societies or in modern times, whether enactment or performance of whatever kind, whether voluntary performance or whether performance which is planned out. So see, when Brecht is writing in a variety of genres, he takes inputs from these also. So theatre is not only complicated, it is not only, I wouldn't use the word problematized, but it is a new kind of theatre, a new theatre of the 20th century that takes into account all the diversities that life was subjected to throughout the world post-World War II. And this is very important, and that is why we have such brilliant plays like The Good Woman of Szechuan. The Good Woman of Szechuan, written in the 40s of the 20th century, 1943, this is a play which talks about a single most important character. The good woman, of course, the common sense. It could have been different also. But this good woman or the good person of Szechuan talks about a prostitute, okay? And Shento is the prostitute who is actually a very good woman. Now, the very notion of prostitution as derogatory for a woman's chastity, for society, the very notion of prostitution as bad is right away negated in the beginning. Because as we see the story in the prologue, that when the story begins, there are three gods who have descended from heaven because they have come to know that in the world there are people who are selfish, who are evil, who are dishonest, who are all committing crimes, and they are extremely murderous and full of greed and lust, etc. All the sins that could be there with human beings, and none of the characters are exempt from these qualities, and they think that visiting the world would at least make them come across one character to cement their belief that humanity, the essential humaneness, still exists in human beings. So they come down to the earth in the city of Szechuan, and they are met by Wang. Wang is the water seller. He's not very honest, but to an extent, because Brecht shows how Wang goes from door to door, asking them, pleading them to keep the gods for a night, because the gods need a resting place for the night. And it is ultimately this prostitute, Shento, who shelters the gods for the night. She may be a prostitute following a very forbidden profession from the viewpoint of ethical norms and moralities in any society. But we see later on and throughout the play that Shento is a woman of morals. She's a woman of ethics. She never cheats anybody. She never commits something that she cannot do. She's always helping people, her relatives, distant relatives, people who know her. She's vulnerable at the hands of each and everybody. And to the best of her abilities, she never says no, because she's always trying to help the poor and needy. In a place like Szechuan, she's met with a large queue of people who wait on her. And after the gods leave, they reward her with money, so that when the scene begins, when the act really begins, we see that Shento has set up a tobacco shop. Now this tobacco shop is filled in a very short time with beggars, with people, opportunist people, clever people, people who are greedy. They want to, lead their lives on Shento's money, and Shento cannot refuse them. But she knows that she has to survive. So one of the most essential, one of the most important messages of the play is, when you finish reading the play, you will understand that it is the dialectics, the binary between righteous moral action and social survival. I repeat, the one of the play's major and perhaps the most important theme, or rather the only theme, is the dialectics between righteous moral action and social survival. Is social survival possible where you are righteous, where you are on the path of truth, where you don't hurt anybody, where you always help everybody? Is it possible that you exist with taking others into account? No. The play gives us a very stern message. So what happens to Shento? Shento, in order to survive in this wicked world, invents a character, and that is Shuita. Now Shuita is the alter ego of Shento. And Shuita is such a character who is shrewd to the last limit. He is a very adept businessman. He is very clever. He can foresee things. He can get to the bottom of any intrigue or plan, and even before anybody could take advantage of him, Shuita takes appropriate measures to stall their approach. So Shuita is a person of the world. He is a worldly, wise person. He has his rapport with all the policemen, the people in power, the politicians, and very slowly, or rather, at a steady pace, people realize that there is no connection, there is no mental or, characteristically, friendly connection between Shuita and Shento, because Shuita doesn't dishonor Shento, but he does not follow the path that the prostitute Shento had adopted in her life. So what happens towards the end of the play? Amidst all the marketplace scenes and amidst all the minor characters, badgering for everything, and every now and then there is a fight on the road where, Shento has made a promise and she has to fulfill that and all that. We see that Shuita actually uplifts Shento's motive of carrying out a good business, and he transforms the little tobacco shop into a 2 to 3 storied building and becomes a merchant. He becomes so prosperous in his trade that people come to know him from far and wide. But what is the end result? What happens to Shento? If she had invented an alter ego, then where does she come? Where does she figure? The townspeople, including her lover, now there is a character over here, Yang Sang. Yang Sang is actually Shento's lover, who has discarded her, who had in fact ditched her, taken advantage of her vulnerability, of her love, and he had left her pregnant. In a very extreme moment of crisis, he had called her and he had purposely not married her. And Shento, in this sorry state of affairs, cannot go on carrying on the role of a prostitute, cannot go on living the life of an ordinary woman, cannot go on living the life of a businesswoman either, cannot go on to stop telling her relatives that no, I cannot help you, beyond my means. So what happens is, Shuita is put to trial by people who believe that Shuita had murdered Shento. The three gods are the only judges who dissent in the courtroom scene. And it is alone that Shuita makes the confession to the gods that Shento is not murdered. He makes this confession that Shento herself had turned into Shuita because she needed to survive in this hostile, in this extremely cruel world. But the gods make no pronouncements. The gods do not pass any judgment. They just rise upward and they leave the world like when they had come from heaven to descend on earth and decide, or rather see the state of affairs in the world, existing in the world. So what happens is, how does Brecht conclude the play? There was a prologue, of course, and the epilogue states that this is the job of the audience. The audience has to make the pronouncement. What Shento has done, that is inventing an alter ego, inventing another self to exist because we need to survive, it is survival for the fittest. That alter ego has ultimately amassed Shento totally. And is this okay? Is this right? Is this something which we all can do? If we cannot control our weaknesses, if we cannot say no, if we are not habituated to, change according to situations, circumstances, preferences, and reading the surroundings in which we exist. So there is a great onus on the audience who have to make the final pronouncement. This is the inner message of the play. When I was talking about Brecht using the alienation effect, let me tell you that alienation is not always signs, symbols, placards, posters, breaking the fourth wall, having a narrator, which is of course there here, half curtain, all these are there. But in this particular play, there is another very interesting element, the element of songs. And these songs make the temporary break with the action. They help the audience to understand that, well, we are watching a play, it's not a chunk of real life, it's a story. Nevertheless, it is a story. Maybe based on real life, but in real life we cannot invent an alter ego, and that alter ego cannot suffice, and that alter ego cannot exist in our place always. Okay, we exist as characters with layers, so a layered character, with various shades to our personality. We're not one and the same person everywhere, all the time, at all places. So this is a very interesting play where we have the element of songs, as I said, and songs help the audience to create that necessary break. It helps the audience to understand the message and then again come back to the action and take over from there. The question of engagement, which Brecht says that engagement is very important and not emotion. Association is not important, but you have to get to the message of the play. So when you read the play, The Good Person of Sezua, you have to read the play from the viewpoint of understanding what Brecht is actually trying to do. There are very minor characters like the old man, the old woman, the limping man, the carpenter, the nephew, etc., etc. All these characters maybe are not central characters, but they're central to the action to bring out the message of the play. The main four characters, that is Yang San, Chen To, Shuita, and of course Wang or Wang. These are the major characters who give you the idea of how people exist. They are made to exist, they are forced to exist, and they do exist in society. So please read the play, my dear students, and come up with more questions. I would definitely in my next lecture, I would try to answer your questions. Till then, stay healthy, stay safe, stay home, because as you know, we are passing through very difficult times. We are all quarantined at home. Hope this phase gets over soon. Stay well. Good luck. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.